Reinhild Niebuhr. I'm the founder of the Young Africa Vision. Welcome to this episode of Young Africa Today. In today's episode, I'm introducing you to Riaan Rautenbach. He is a very experienced businessman who's been doing work all across Africa. Then he started using all this experience to design a mobile app that helps companies all across Africa that are in the transport business to optimize their loads so that there's no truck needed to run empty at any point in time. Riaan also has a very interesting vision for Africa. So I hope you enjoy this interview.
I'm born South African, but I've lived and worked in 5 African countries and mainly in the milling industry. I have been exposed as well a lot into African markets, both formal and informal markets, and agriculture as well. Companies that I worked for is maize and flour milling, and I've also distributed stock feeds and pastas, biscuits, and a lot of other products, packed sugar, etc. And I've traded with about 12 African countries. Neighboring countries that are supplied with flour, maize meal, and other products. And in brief, I've lived and worked born in South Africa, moved to Botswana for 5 years in 2000, and then I was back in South Africa for a short period of about 5 years, and then I went to Zambia for 4 years in Kitwe in the Copper Belt, came back to South Africa to Swaziland for 1 year, then went back to the Copper Belt, but in Ndola, in Zambia. And then I have also lived and worked for 2 years in Calabar, Nigeria. That was quite interesting.
So as you were working and traveling in Africa, what are some of the main things that strike you from a business point of view?
The main thing that strikes me is overall in Africa, it is more informal. Markets are more informal. Trade is a lot more informal, although there are big formal corporates that operate on Western terms and also rules. But I find that in general, your most volume in Africa are being moved into your semi-corporate and then also informal markets. Local wholesalers and retailers, you do find them, and they have also their different ways of doing things, or I would rather say African ways of doing things. A lot of trade in Africa that I believe is not being taken into account is informal trade, which is always cash, or it's a real trade, product for product. And that is nowhere to be recorded in banking transactions or statistics or anything. For an example, I can say to you, even one of the probably the biggest and busiest borders in Africa is Kasumbalesa to the Congo. And I am very sure that no one can tell you, for an example, how many tons of fish are moved through that border in a period of time, or tomatoes, or any other products. So it's very informal. Some of the products even bypasses the official borders. It goes through the veld where there's no controls, a lot of things, and that's mainly to bypass heavy taxes, etc., etc. But there's also informal taxes when you take the other routes. So rivers trade in Africa is also very big that I've found. River trade, reasons being on the Mokoros, as they call it, they also, on the rivers, they bypass borders. There's no official opening things. And what's interesting is, therefore, you can find, interestingly enough, products in Lubumbashi cheaper than you'll find it in South Africa. And it's mainly because of these taxes that are being evaded. Africa, there is plenty of land, there is plenty of water, in countries like Zambia and even in Zimbabwe. I've got big hope for Africa's future.
This is very interesting. So what you are saying in essence is that if we look at, for instance, the the statistics that we see about the economies in Africa is that they are in all probability wrong, because they are not taking account of all the informal trade that's actually going on, and that probably or possibly the economies in Africa are much bigger and much more productive than what the figures that we see from institutions that are keeping track of this, of the economic activity in Africa, can show. Would you think that that's true?
If I can give you a small example, I started working in the copper belt at Mpongwe Milling in 2009, and I left there in 2013. I lived and worked then again from 2013 to 2017 in Ndola, which is 60 kilometers, at another milling company, Olympic Milling. Now, if I recall, my first year at Mpongwe Milling, I bought about 80+% of maize from commercial farmers in Zambia. And whilst when I left there, I bought about 40% of the maize from commercial farmers, and about 60% of the maize was bought from informal farmers, smaller farmers that set out in rural areas. And by the time I went to Olympic Milling, I bought last year I left Olympic Milling close to 80% of my maize from these local farmers. They were called in those years small scale farmers, but I tend to say they're no more small scale. If they can supply a maize mill of that capacity, of about 80% of the maize in a year, there is definitely a change happening. Quality-wise, I was a lot of times confronted by and questioned by the commercial farmers. Yes, but what's the quality? And I must say that the quality of the small farmers growing maize is really on par with the required milling standards, and what commercial, in some cases, actually better maize that I bought some from the local farmers. So that to me is also a positive sign. I believe that agriculture in a smaller quantities will become put together big quantities, and the way they farm as well is like in the old days, they don't farm the lands poorer. Like your commercial farmers has to put in, for instance, if you look at the Orange Free State in South Africa or anywhere else, they buy in a lot of chemicals to put into the soil to keep it fruitful, to grow their crops. Whilst in these farmers, they just grow as they used to for many years. In other words, the plant just go back into the ground. They only take off the pips and the seeds or from whatever they plant. So the soil does not become weaker or poorer in terms of minerals to feed the plants. So that's also an interesting thing.
That's very interesting, and it certainly gives a new perspective on the agricultural potential for Africa. Now, when you were in Nigeria, were you also working at a milling plant?
No, I was also working at a milling plant in Nigeria. Their staple food is flour, porridge they make from flour. And they have started trials with GMO modified wheat, because Nigeria is not wheat climate. So all the wheat that we milled came from either Ukraine or from Russia, maybe sometimes from Argentina by ship. We offloaded from the harbor in Calabar, but that was the biggest plants I've ever managed, where in South Africa and in Zambia, your average plants are built for about 10 to 15,000 tons of grains being milled in a month. At that plant, I had a built-in capacity of about 33,000 tons of grain to be milled in a month. So it was very huge. But even in Nigeria, although their staple feed is wheat, commercial milled wheat, the fish and natural resources. No, they've got a lot of very healthy foods that's indigenous to Nigeria, and I believe that even those resources will in a way also become more economical. It's always available in the informal markets, fish, vegetables, and all other kinds of plant materials for edible human consumption, but which is actually healthy.
This is very interesting. I must say that I remember once when I was doing consulting work in Nigeria that I was flying at night out back to South Africa, and the as the plane lifted up, I just saw all these dots on, in darkness, and I was thinking, but
Mm.
this is strange. We should be over the ocean by now. And
Mm.
and I realized that there were ships. There were, as far as my eye could see, there were lights of ships that were importing things into Nigeria. And one of my passions is to really see how can we how can we restore the balance in terms of having at least as many ships exporting things from Africa as we have ships importing things into Africa. And if you're telling me that all the grains that you were milling there were literally imported, it does beg for the question that if Nigerians would simply change their diet
Yes,
to more
yes,
healthy food, they
yes.
didn't, they could change a bit of a outflow of capital. And so these are just some of the conversations that I think that we as people living in Africa need to have.
Yes. No, there's loads of potential to first of all to become completely independent from the rest of the world in terms of food supply, um, and there is a definite shift. I worked for a big corporate in Nigeria, but they believed in backward integration, which is flour milling mainly. They have later invested in uh, thousands of hectares farming. I can't remember exactly how many for sugarcane. And as we speak now, after I think about 10 years term, they have two sugar mill plants in Nigeria where they used to import all the sugar consumption in Nigeria. And there's over 200 million people. So that is happening. Cassava as well, the same company that I work for, they had put up a cassava plant, a milling plant in Kanu, if I remember correctly. And there's also other projects they're working on edible oils. So they are investing a lot in local farming and also not only for themselves, but also individuals with farms that can supply to products to be packed by the group and sold into big town cities like Lagos, Kanu, Calabar, Anambra, Enugu.
Very interesting. So tell
Mm.
me, just this particular company, is it owned by Nigerians or is it an international company?
It is a Nigerian public listed company.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, very interesting. I know that we have very limited time, and I definitely want you to talk about your very interesting project that you started working on since you left the milling industry. Could you maybe
Yes.
tell our viewers about what live freight is all about?
Yes. Life Rate I have specifically developed to enable any person on the street that's got a cell phone, or as we say, a smart device, to become an entrepreneur by either moving cargo or transporting cargo in the whole of Africa and the rest of the world. Um, it is a cloud tech application. It's not available on the Play Store or on the Google Play Store or the iStore. You have to register on our web page because we need to verify all our users for various reasons. And then after the registration process is completed, they can download the application on their cell phones. So you just need a basic cell phone that's got internet connection. The app is very light, only uses about 500 kilobytes. not megabytes, kilobytes storage on your phone. It's very fast. Through tested by Google, we can handle 80,000 and more transactions per second. And now to explain how it works, on the cargo supplier application is written in such a way that an individual or a company can use this application to expose any type of road freight cargo to transporters. And then the transporter application is also designed for anybody that has a vehicle to transport goods by road, from a motorcycle, one-ton pickup, to your superlinks, stotliners, tankers, cooler trucks, all of the type of vehicles we accommodate on the application, and all of the cargo categories. So and that is in short. So the application brings the two parties together. The cargo supplier uses the app for free, completely, no payments, and we want loads on the app to be exposed for anyone with vehicles to transport it. So they capture by Google Map pickup address and delivery address and the cargo category, cargo weight, and a lot of more information, insurance on the freight if it's required, etc. Then the transporter can find the loads by just typing on their application, find loads, and then they can select or put in any city or town in Africa, and then they can find loads just by clicking on that on Google Maps up to 100, 200 or 300 kilometers around any town. They will find loads that's available. They can then quote for those loads on the application. The application has a standard quotation format which they complete. That's then being sent to the owner of the cargo. He can compare the quotations and decide which ones he's going to accept. And the ones that he's not accepting, he'll just reject them. And then the transporter, if it's a company, you can also register as an individual on the transport application or as a company. If you're a company, you can add your loading planners below you if you're the manager, and they then in turn add the drivers below them. Then they can, if they successfully quoted for a load, they can then allocate a load to a driver on the app, so you don't even have to do any phone calls. We cut out all the phone calls. It's all data, so it's the cheapest way of communication available currently in the world, is just using data. And then they do a small payment to Life Rate for any cargo below 2,500 kilograms. In South Africa, for example, they just pay us 1 cent per kilometer, which is, you won't find it anywhere else at that rate. For bigger loads, they will pay 50 cents per kilometer to a maximum of 500 Rand. And that is in itself less than the phone calls that we save them by using our application. The other good thing then about the application is the driver that's being assigned to the load will get an SMS to look at his pending cargo. And then once the driver is assigned, he starts his delivery by clicking on the app, and the app generates from his GPRS coordinates. So he doesn't even type a message, he just says start transit, and it will drop a yellow pin where he starts the transit. You can do a single drop or you can do multi-drops on the application for one vehicle, and then everybody can follow. There's no phone calls, where's your driver? And the driver doesn't have to phone someone, I'm here, I'm there, or even the owner of the cargo will then see on his app as the cargo supplier where his cargo is moving and when it's delivered. And even the driver's manager or his controllers will see where he's busy. So everybody is in the picture on the movement of the cargo. Once the driver reaches final destination and deliver it, he can take a picture from his cell phone of the proof of delivery, upload it to that load, and then the transport company will rate the cargo supplier on 3 criteria. He will rate him on communication and on how the information and detail was about the load, because that's important that the drivers, transporters knows what they're transporting. And the last one, payment. So if you get a bad rating, obviously the people will review doing work for you on our application. And then also the cargo supplier will rate the transporter on his timeousness on the pickup and delivery, and he gets a rating on the appearance of the driver and the vehicle, and a rating on how the goods was handled in transit, and then also communication. So ongoing, everybody will see everybody's rating, like Airbnb, like Uber. So thereby we mitigate business risk. People taking chances will not be able to use it. But the main aim here is to enable anyone to partake in the logistics in South Africa on road freight on the same level. So even if you're an individual, you can compete with anyone else.
You were now saying South Africa. Is this not available across Africa?
We are available in 19 African countries at the moment.
Okay.
We are available in Nigeria, and then from Uganda, all the countries, including Uganda, down south from Uganda.
So will one find that on the website, on your website? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, that sounds amazing. I really see that this is something that can create a very, very useful tool for building a livelihood for many, many thousands of transport companies or transporters across Africa. And I particularly like the fact that you can do this whether you have a bike or whether you have a truck. That's really great. And I was wondering about backpacks, if we can add backpacks to the mix.
Yes, we can look at that.
For on foot transport for home deliveries.
Yes, and I think as well in Africa where this will become very handy is in the rural areas in Africa.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking.
Someone wants to move something from a rural area into the markets can just take the chance and put it on the app as a load.
Yes.
And then and also what's nice about the application, once someone has successfully quoted, there's a chat box on that load. So they can start chatting to each other like WhatsApp.
Okay.
As well, very cheap, yes.
Okay.
There are some small courier companies that have started using ours as a software.
Yes, yes.
So the lady, for instance, in the office that captures all the parcels, she uses our app and capture all their parcels on the app on the one drop.
Okay.
And then the guy who's in charge of the 3 or 4 vehicles that they do their courier companies work for, he has registered as a transporter.
Okay.
So all they do is they just ignore anything else on the app.
Yes.
They just he will quote for his own company, and she will approve his quote, and he will assign a driver, and she will then typically, instead of having expensive on-site servers software, he will just then send the recipient a screenshot. Here, your good has been delivered. And it's on when the tracking is always available, so she can even give them always on the tracking updates on WhatsApp by sending the recipient updates on where the driver is.
Yes.
Easy.
Yeah, that sounds really amazing. Now, we have a couple of minutes left on our interview, and I started this Young Africa Today show because I really believe that we people living in Africa need to work together to define the vision of this Africa. How do we want this continent to look like? How do we want our continent to look like? What is the Africa we want? And so I'm going to ask you if you can maybe just in a few, just think a little bit about what is the vision for Africa that you would love to see happen?
Interesting question. No, I look forward to give my view of it. I've read a couple of books. I'm going to strange, but I've read a couple of books from universities and Africans written on economics, on agriculture by Africans. The first thing is I think we must forget about Western rules and standards, number one. That creates friction because Africa is different from the rest of the world in many ways, yet positive, some negative. But I think if we take the positives from Africa in terms of the trading, informal trading, informal ways of doing transactions, we will have to get that onto technology. And by that, I'm not saying now we change it to Western standards and things. We just use this as a vessel for Africa to still continue doing business the way they do it. So wallets is one thing that comes to mind. If you have a wallet on this and they come to an agreement to do trade, and instead of using money to pay, because banks are not all over Africa, especially rural Africa, where there's a lot of activities and productivity going on. As I mentioned in the beginning, it's not being recorded, but that will enable them. And there are some of these softwares already available. I know that there's one specifically for farmers in Africa to move their products, and like we have now with Life Rate to enable them to do things, so that they continue doing and using their structures as is, but just improve it by using technology.
That is very exciting. I'm sort of wondering if you could mention some of the books that you were talking about, or some of the authors, so that our viewers can know about them. That would be helpful if you can think of one or two.
I'll just quickly, while we are here, go on that. There's one book that's called Emerging Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And The Great Rift, there's also a quite nice book. So
The Great Rift. Okay.
To come back to what we want to see, the same applies for medical equipment, medicines. If I believe technology is going to open up doors for Africa by reaching out to all of the people in the less cost way possible, least costs to everybody. Because in Africa, to buy data is expensive for an average African. That's why our app is so light and using so little data. So cloud technology is the future nonetheless. So, and then I believe that there's a lot of improvements in terms of infrastructure needed in Africa, roads specifically. There's also a lot of articles. Uganda is doing quite well lately with infrastructure expansions, the roads specifically. And if we look at Rwanda, what's happened in Rwanda, it's one of the top developing countries in the world today. A few people realize there's even a stock exchange in Rwanda. And I think the Western world tends to overlook a lot of these things in Africa, but there's a shift. There is a shift. And I think especially with what's happening in the world is definitely a shift. We've got the riches in Africa. And I think agriculture can play a far bigger role than what it's currently playing in Africa. Africa should be able to feed their own quite easily. I wouldn't say easily, but with some work, it's possible that can be done, because the land is arable, and we have so many indigenous plants that is actually a lot more healthy than what we know. There's a pepper in Nigeria, pepper soup they make with scented leaves. They call it scented leaves, and I have actually used that for malaria and some other, when you're not too well, if you drink that soup, it gives you a good go. So there's a lot, there's not enough time to go into the details there. But in a nutshell, I think if there's good ears to listen to Africa and what Africans want and how they want it, we will do a lot better. I can quickly give you a very good example. I started working in Botswana, and I realized I'm the only South African there. I'm an African, fortunately. I was born in Africa, but I don't speak Tswana. So I started learning, and I said to myself, I must learn the language, because if I'm the only guy here, and I'm in charge of this whole plant, taking all the responsibilities, but I can't hear what they say. So I started learning slowly, and I started interacting and getting to know my staff on a personal level, not like socializing, but at work. Who are you? How's it going with your family? And that. And I started greeting everybody in the morning when I walked to the office. I always walked through the warehouse and through the milling plants, greeted the people. And then later on, my culture, I didn't greet them. I was waiting for them to greet me, because we, as our culture, it's good manners to greet someone first. And they didn't greet me back. And fortunately, I didn't query them. I went to the HR manager, Jacobeth Jabia. I said to her, listen, but the people are not greeting me. But I greet them every morning. She says to me, yes, you're the boss. They're busy with work. If they greet you first, it means they disrespect their work. They drop their tools and they greet you and they start conversation. That means they have no respect for the work. But if you've greeted them, it means you have given them permission to engage with you. So that's why I will always have to greet them first. Then it's to them like, yes, the boss has greeted me or the manager has greeted me. Now I am allowed to talk to the manager and leave my broom or leave my good morning, sir, how are you doing? So these are small little things which are hampering us a lot, and we are not even realizing it.
That is so true. I think that my experience working across Africa has been the same, is that these intercultural interactions leave a lot of room for misunderstanding, and it's really important to just get to understand and and ask questions and be open and not just assume things that people are thinking in a certain way or that they're acting in a certain way, when in reality there's a cultural disconnect and one needs to bridge that. So thank you, Riaan. This was really very interesting. I'm very excited about your app, and I really wish you and all the companies using it and all the drivers that are going to be looking for loads on it all the best. And thank you very much for your time.
Reinhild, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be with you on this interaction, and I trust you and your whole vision for Africa as well. All the best, and I believe that you will succeed. Just never give up.
Thank you very much. That's a typical wish for any entrepreneur, I suppose.
Yes.
Never give up. We just don't
Never
give up.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No, that's
Thanks.
good. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye. I hope that any one of you who has listened to this and who is looking for an opportunity to do business will just simply sign up for Live Freight and start transporting goods, or start making sure that your goods are known so that people can take it to wherever they need to go. We are in a very interesting time. Like Riaan said, what Africa needs, the vision for Africa, is really around making use of this new technology, building new systems to suit the culture, not trying to impose things on top of the ways that people are doing, using agriculture as one of the key economic drivers, and being very respectful of the culture in Africa. Thank you very much for watching. See you in the next episode.